Welcome back, troglodytes, to the Trogley's Guitar Show. Today we kind of have a rarity. Now, this is an example of a rare guitar that's not necessarily desirable, so it doesn't command a huge premium, but there are a few people that look for these guitars. This is the Gibson XR-1. Now, the big famous user for this line of guitars, his name is Steve Clark, and he was the guitarist of Def Leppard. Now, you can see him play this style of guitar in many music videos and in old live recordings. So that's pretty much your main demographic for somebody who wants to find one of these. They don't show up very often, and when they do, they kind of command the same premium as like a studio standard or a studio custom. But let's learn a little bit about the XR series. Likely, you've never even heard of it because, well, it's just not well known. Unless you're a Gibson history buff like I am, these mainly just go under the radar for most people. Eventually, I'll make a video titled something along the lines of The Road to the Les Paul Studio, and I'll go over all the runs that kind of predates the studio, but the XR series is the last one before we finally made it to the actual studio model. So our first one is called the XR-1. What does XR stand for? I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you. I could not find that information anywhere. If you know, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below, but I'm going to hypothesize that XR stands for experiment. You know, you get it? Experiment. I have no idea if that's right or wrong, but hey, it kind of works. Because that's kind of what these series were. The XR-1 was the very first one. This is basically the first modern day Les Paul Studio, as you would think of it. It has the full-size mahogany body with a maple top, and these do still have the maple necks. You can kind of see that right there by the chip on the headstock. And despite being a really dark rosewood, it is still a rosewood, not ebony. But what kind of makes these guitars special is that they have dirty finger pickups that are coil splittable. So this little switch right here is factory. It is a coil split switch. It basically makes these sound like single coils, kind of. These are the same type of pickups that you'll find in many of the Flying V's of the 80s and the Explorers, as well as the exact same pickups as you'll find in the 335S. So this buddy does have a carved top. It's not a flat top like the Paul series. And then the XR2 series is completely different from this. Imagine a Les Paul special, but instead of P90s, you have mini humbuckers, and instead of a boring plain top, you throw a really nice flame maple one-piece top, most of them anyways, and then you retain the coil split switch. Yes, coil split with a mini humbucker, and that's kind of what you get with the XR2 series. That one has a slightly thinner body, kind of like a Les Paul special. You can see that the back toggle switch cavity route is just like the 55-75 Les Paul special reissues. They have to do that type of route because I'm guessing the traditional three-way switch would stick out past the back plate, so they use kind of the SG L-shaped style. So those ones are absolutely beautiful. I would love to one day review one of those. I came very close about 6 months ago. I paid more for it than I wanted to, but it had the most spectacular top on it. But unfortunately, after I had bought it, they said somebody else bought it in store before me. So I'm still on the search for a really nice XR2 to do a review on. Something else that's nice about the XR2 series is they do have the single ply binding on the body, but nowhere else on the guitar. So the XR2 is basically a blend between a Les Paul Special and a Les Paul Deluxe. Now, the final experiment is XR3. That one is just like this guitar, except for you don't have the coil split switch here, and you have Tim Shaw PAFs instead of dirty fingers. So for most people, they'll choose between the XR1 or the XR3, depending on what pickup preference they have. The XR3 is also the first one not to feature a number on the Truss Rod cover. They switched to a Roman numeral 3, which I don't think makes any sense. If they did XR1 this way and XR2 this way, they should have just stuck with XR3 instead of III. Now, I made a video on the Les Paul number 1 a few days ago, and Dennis Chandler, the guy who actually owns that guitar, I believe he was the Gibson regional manager. I think he said from 79 to about 83 or so. And that's like at the pinnacle where all the cool stuff was coming out. But I was talking to him about old parts that just got used up. And the switch right here, I'm guessing Gibson decided to do these because this switch is the same one that you will find on the Les Paul Artist series, as well as the other Artist guitars. They must have been trying to use this type of switch up. This one is not like the 25/50th anniversary switch. This one has more of a squared off top, which makes it easier to get, compared to the 25/50 that's kind of just a small cylinder switch. So, the XR-1, my first impression is, wow, this thing is heavy. It weighs somewhere around 10 pounds, but this thing feels like a 14-pound monster. All of this weight is directly in the body, and you can feel it while you're holding this thing. It is ridiculously heavy, but it does sound really nice with these dirty finger humbuckers. So, let's talk about this finish. What color is this to you guys? Leave your answer down in the comment section below, and now I'm going to tell you. If you answered Tobacco Sunburst, you're wrong. This is Goldburst. It's kind of hard to tell in photos. Even the Reverb price guide has this wrong. It is Goldburst. Goldburst was a very shortly lived finish in the very early 80s. Want to know why you don't see it? It's because this finish is not guitar friendly. It does what you call an orange peeling effect due to the metal flake in the finish. It's where this gives the guitar a textured feel, kind of like you're feeling an orange peel. So it's not glossy and smooth, it's kind of rigid in a way. Many Goldburst finish guitars, especially the customs, were sent back under warranty to be refinished. So finding a Goldburst anything is usually fairly rare, and they usually command a premium, especially the customs. If you can find a Goldburst Les Paul custom in mint condition, that's a gold mine right there. Every single one that shows up always has finish wear on the back of the neck, or the finish is flaking off. I actually did have one that's probably the cleanest one in existence. Yes, it still had the orange peeling effect to it, but it was just so beautiful because it hadn't been played a lot, so the finish was still there. Now this one's actually held up pretty well. I don't think it's the exact same type of finish used on the customs, because this one has more of a darker outline. The customs kind of varied between what the outside color would be. But the back of this guitar is not black. It's kind of a grayish green black color. It's kind of hard to describe. If you get up real close, it is a transparent finish, so you can kind of see through it, but it definitely is not black. You'll see that this back route is very large. This is the same type of back plate as you'll find on the 25/50th anniversary Les Paul, as well as the Paul series. So this was just kind of a way for Gibson to start thinking about a Les Paul, an actual Les Paul, we're not talking like the Marauder S1 series here, an actual entry-level Gibson guitar. So the XR series definitely has some historical significance to it as far as leading up to the Les Paul studio. You'll find the information everywhere says 1981 through 1983 for the 3 runs. That's wrong. And I'll prove it to you right here because this one is a very late 1980, so take that. But it's a lot easier to say 81 through 83 instead of late 1980 through 83, so I get it. This was made like the second week of December in 1980, so this is likely one of the first ones made. So if you see an XR series guitar, would I suggest checking it out? Definitely. Would I suggest paying a huge premium for one of these if you're not a Steve Clark fan or you just aren't trying to complete a collection of some sorts? No, probably not. There's a rarity and provenance to these types of guitars. So I understand why these sell for as much as they do. So let's go ahead and hear how this one sounds. I've got to say, Troglodytes, after learning that this was Steve Clark's guitar and playing all those Def Leppard songs, I mean, I just learned those. I've never really sat down and played any of those riffs before now. I've really bonded with this guitar over that. It's kind of like the signature guitar phenomenon. When you play the exact same guitar that somebody you idolize used, there really is something special to that. It helps inspire you to play stuff that you don't always do. I always experience this with like the Zakk Wylde Les Paul signatures. And even though this is like a lowly studio model, all of a sudden this guitar feels like so much more than it is. So I really do suggest you check out an XR-1 if you see one and play some Def Leppard on it, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. This guitar weighs 10 pounds, 1.7 ounces, but feels a lot heavier than that, and features a 60s to a 60s medium neck profile. Now that we know how this one sounds, let's go ahead and look at its condition. Alright, so the most part, this guitar is actually in pretty good shape. You can see you've got some light scratches, some nicks and dings on the headstock, but this one actually has held up pretty well. Now, I believe these tuners have been replaced. Some of these that you see will have the Gibson branding on the back of these, whereas I think this is a replacement part. And what kind of makes me think that is usually you'll get these chips around the washers of a tuner if they've been replaced once or twice before. Sometimes it can just happen naturally due to the pressure there, but I'm going to go ahead and say the tuners are replacements. The truss rod cover reads XR-1, and the truss rod itself works just fine. Nice straight neck on this one. You've got a beautiful chocolate colored rosewood fretboard on this one. It really did oil up nicely. This had a lot of natural patina to it when I got it, so when I cleaned it up, I was happy to see that that didn't really go away. You do have some flattening on the frets. You could do a level recrown job if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to at this point in time. There is some very mild divoting into the fretboard itself from someone's long fingernails. It's not too bad on this example, but I do want you to be aware that that is present. It's pretty well up and down the whole entire neck. This was somebody's gigging guitar. Alright, so our switch tip has been replaced with a metal one. No real big deal. You can pick up one of those pretty cheaply if you'd rather have an original style. But lots of scratches. You can see a seam line right there. I believe this is a 3-piece top. We'll find out here. But you got the orange peeling to the finish, as Goldburst is known for. And lots of scratches, nicks and dings. But overall, this one has definitely stood the test of time for a studio model. Usually these things will just get beaten up, they'll have the finish worn off their necks. They really are great playing guitars. You have your 4 original speed knobs that have aged beautifully, and your factory coil split switch. And I'm thinking this pickguard has been added because that's not a Gibson bracket I see there, so that's definitely a possibility right there. You still have your stock dirty finger pickups. Something to keep in the back of your mind whenever you have a guitar that has a coil split switch stock from Gibson in the 70s and 80s, sometimes it's not possible to pull your pickups out to get photos. The neck pickup comes out just enough that with a flashlight and the right type of photography you can see the back, but this one, you don't even need screws in this thing. That's how short the leads were cut. It has exactly what it needs with zero room to spare. But I've experienced that on pretty much every single Gibson from this time period that has a factory coil split switch. The wiring all looks untouched, so we're all good there. Original tailpiece and bridge as well. Back of the guitar, your serial number is 83470892. And I want to point out that 892, that's a crazy high number. At this point in time, under 500 meant it was Kalamazoo made. Over 500 meant it was a Nashville model, but that means this was the 392nd guitar stamped that day. That's a really high number. You usually don't quite see them that high, but being a studio model, they must have been pumping these things out. Again, there's no branding on the back of the tuners, so it's possible they've been replaced. Your volute is still in place, and you've got a very small ding right there. And if you catch it in the light just right, you can see it is still a 3-piece maple neck. You've got some light impressions on this one, some light scratches as well. But overall, no finish like worn off or anything. That's always a turn off for me. Now the back of the guitar, you've got some buckle worming areas, some more extreme orange peeling effect areas as well. But there's kind of the gist of it right there. But here you can kind of see those orange peel areas. You can definitely feel them on the back in these areas, but lots of wear and tear on the back of this thing. This was definitely not a case queen, but it has definitely held up very well. And now we'll take a look at the sides. This feels like a really chunky Les Paul. Once the Studio was introduced and they made the Studio Standard and Studio Custom models, they were actually slightly thinner bodies. This one's a full-size body. But you've got some nicks and dings here. There's a little bit of finish rub right there. And I believe these strap buttons have been replaced to a similar style, but definitely not what I'm used to seeing on a Gibson at this point in time. Alright, so Backlight Test. This checks for repairs and finish touch-ups. You can also see if certain parts are original, like the knobs, which they are. They're glowing the way I would expect it to be. So the top of this guitar, you've just kind of got some light chipping around the edges, but everything else is looking good under blacklight. Face of the headstock, everything is also looking good. Again, you can see the chipping around the tuner bushings. Back of the guitar is also looking just as good, with just some mild buckle worming. The finish is intact on the neck. You can see where a player's sweaty hands has kind of been absorbed in the cowboy cord area, but everything is glowing the way I would expect to see. And you've got a very small finish blemish right here. There are no breaks, cracks, or repairs, but there is kind of a very small finish chip on the volute. And finally, a quick look at the sides of the guitar. So overall, I mean, this thing, it's got some light wear, but you know, for a studio model, usually these things will get pretty beat up. So this one is actually in pretty clean condition, all things considered. This guitar does come in its original Gibson case. This is a case that I thought only the 335S got, as far as the latches go anyways. This was kind of a very shortly lived latch style for Gibson, instead of those cylindrical ones that are usually found on a case. Now unfortunately, only that one, this one, and the back latch are present, so you've got some scuffs to the toe lex, but for the most part it's in good shape. The interior is a nice bright vibrant red, and it really does hold the guitar very well. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Gibson XR-1, feel free to contact me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Troglys, Troglys, or check out the link to my reverb shop in the description. Thank you, Troglys, for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.